didn't. The Cenobites gave me an experience beyond the limits. Pain.
While the Hellraiser universe is known as one of the biggest franchises in pop culture, fans still wonder what really goes on in the depths of hell. The Cenobites are an especially mysterious breed, and while they're known for their sadistic rituals and torture methods, there is a lot of confusion regarding the fate of their victims. Fans have wondered whether these Cenobite victims suffer forever, or if some of them are hand-picked to be Cenobites. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into the Cenobites' torture methods and their cruelty towards their victims, and tell you all about what they have set in store for the people that they captured. Before we get into this explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to the channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
Oh God, please, God.
Fate of Cenobite victims. For starters, people who end up solving the Lament configuration puzzle box are typically targeted by the Cenobites, who immediately appear before them and claim their lives. After killing them in the mortal world, these victims are dragged into the pits of hell, where their souls remain for eternity. Cenobites perceived these people as sacrifices, and they were masters of all sensations who took great pleasure in making their victims suffer in the most painful ways imaginable. Some fans wondered whether these victims were tortured for a certain amount of time before their bodies crumbled, or whether they turned into a Cenobite or Leviathan servant. However, this doesn't seem to be the case for the majority of them, as their souls were slated to remain in the labyrinth or hell at large for all eternity. In both the Hellraiser movies and the graphic novels, it was noticed that the Cenobites would restructure their victims in order to repeat the process of torturing them over and over again. Even death wasn't an option for these victims, and the Hell Priest had once enlisted the help of a young autistic boy named Jeremy to reconstruct these bodies. In one of the Hellraiser Bestiary comics, Jeremy's obsession with solving puzzles led him to a job where he had to put corpses back together so that the Cenobites could continue torturing their victims over and over again. In this way, the Cenobites didn't care much for their victims' physical health and were content with the idea of their consciousness being in hell for all eternity. They were content with a semi-functional physical body and repeated the torture process over and over again as long as their victims' bodies were relatively intact. In fact, Riley once asked the priest about their identities, and he replied that they might be perceived as either demons or angels, and that they explored the furthest regions of the experience and sensation realms. The labyrinth remains an important place in the Hellraiser realm for all Cenobite victims, and this is where they spend an eternity being mutilated and tortured. This was seen in the case of Matt and Nora, among others, but some special victims, such as Voight, were selected to be fellow Cenobites. Process of becoming a Cenobite and criteria for selection. Many Cenobite victims were subjected to an eternity of torture, but some of them were taken to a transformation chamber where the engineer operated on them and turned them into Cenobites. This process was excruciatingly painful, as the victims were subjected to excessive mutilation before their blood was siphoned out and replaced with blue fluid. It took such a toll on the victim's mind that they lost all of their memories, and the process can be likened to a lobotomy of sorts. Fans often wondered about the process behind selecting certain victims to turn them into Cenobites, and as it turns out, the demon god Leviathan chooses who is worthy enough to undergo the transformation. It seems like one was eligible to turn into a Cenobite only if they had the capability to indulge in extreme pain and pleasure. This feature was common among Elliot Spencer, aka Pinhead, Dr. Chenard, and even Julia to some extent, who was granted special powers by Leviathan. In the mythos, people with a schism or an obsession with solving the puzzle box to open gateways to extreme human experiences were considered to become Cenobites. These individuals had no moral limitations and were capable of going to great lengths to achieve their desires. As the Lord of the Labyrinth, Leviathan shortlisted a few candidates and judged them in Hell's black light to assess who they were and all that they had done in their lives to decide if they were worthy of the transformation process. During this process, their flesh was altered as a permanent badge of being a part of Hell's hierarchy, and their blood was replaced with a preserving fluid to ensure that their flesh remained in perpetual stasis. This fluid did not entirely replace all of their blood, but their blood did turn black by the end of the process. Their bodies were also disfigured permanently, and they had unique wounds inflicted by the insertion of customized metal structures, wires, or surgical clamps. While these wounds were never fatal, the Cenobites were in constant pain, which served as a reminder of their servitude towards Leviathan. In this way, Cenobite physiology was quite different from human physiology, and they had evolved to a point where their mutilations posed no threat to their lives. It was also suggested that this hellish realm had some natural or supernatural gases or enzymes that inhibited their infections and enabled them to survive in a mutilated state. Another such theory stated that this immunity was built into the Cenobite systems during their transformation and then briefly passed on to their victims when they tortured them. The Lord of the Labyrinth often restructured the Order of the Cenobites and stirred up chaos among the existing order, which led to horrific fights. Only the fittest and most sadistic Cenobites made it to the top, and their survival was also subject to his wishes. While Cenobites like Pinhead had returned from death on numerous occasions, some other Cenobites never made a comeback after their observed deaths. Since they were extra-dimensional beings, they didn't age or feel the need to eat, sleep, breathe, or even reproduce. They typically wore latex or other fetishized clothing items, and Cenobites were also given access to a range of surgical tools and cutting implements after the transformation. When Leviathan chose to perform this procedure himself, the entire transformation, ranging from the mutilations to the outfits, took less than 5 minutes. Additionally, the Cenobites retained little to no memory of their past lives. All that remained was the psyche of a sadistic being who took pleasure in torture and surgical flesh modifications. Examples from canon. The most famous example of someone transforming into a Cenobite is Pinhead, who was also known as Elliot Spencer in his former life. As a young man, he lived in England during the Victorian era and even joined the armed forces during World War I. While he served his time in France as a captain in the British Expeditionary Force, he witnessed great horrors during the Battle of Flanders and lost his faith in humanity. He also struggled with his faith in God and believed that he didn't have the right to live after witnessing so many of his comrades die right in front of his eyes. He soon fell into a deep depression and suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, but then he decided to embark on an adventure around the world. He embraced a hedonistic lifestyle and took great pleasure in pain and suffering until he finally stumbled across the Lament Configuration in British India. In almost no time, he was summoned to Hell, where Leviathan deemed him worthy of becoming a Cenobite. In the same way, Channard went through a roller coaster of a life before finally turning into a Cenobite as well. Exceptions and variations. While there were certain standard rules that remained the same for most Cenobite victims and those who were handpicked by Leviathan to transform into Cenobites, there were some variations as well. To begin with, the rules stated that Cenobites could not take, handle, or use the Lament Configuration on Earth unless it was given to them by those who possessed it. Moreover, they had to follow the summons of anyone who tried to contact them by solving the Lament Configuration box, and the Tesseract Gate from the Hell Dimension was only open long enough for them to bring their victims back to Hell. However, all of these rules had been broken at one point or another, and Cenobites considered them to be moral guidelines instead of rules. In one such example, Cenobites were known for appearing as self-mutilating embalmed entities in recent times, but this was not the case for Angelique, a demon princess who had turned into a Cenobite. Here, a magician named Duke d'Isle had prepared a suitable body for her to inhabit while she entered the earthly plane, as opposed to appearing in a self-mutilating form. However, she was an exception since she was created hundreds of years before these rules were the norm for demons or Cenobites. She was around when the first Lament Configuration box had been created and summoned, and back then, one could only perform the summoning ritual through mystic rituals and rites. These acts of sorcery were no longer required in the modern world, and many Cenobites had some variations in terms of their appearance, transformation process, or their general demeanor towards those who summoned them. Marvelous verdict! And with that, we've explored the fates of the Cenobite victims, as well as the transformation process that took place in the most bottomless pits of hell whenever Leviathan came across someone worthy of being a Cenobite. These creatures were entirely devoted to him, which also reflected in their actions as they suffered through endless pain and unimaginable torture methods to finally transform into a Cenobite. We hope you enjoyed exploring their nature, actions, and transformation procedures with us, and do share your thoughts on these sadistic entities in the comments down below. If you enjoyed our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.